They say a mother's love is unconditional, a heavy, unbreakable anchor that can weather any storm. But looking back at the polished marble floor of the courtroom, watching the woman who gave me life sit across from us with a team of high-priced lawyers, I realized some anchors are meant to drown you. She sat there in her designer suit, dabbing a perfectly dry eye with a silk handkerchief, weeping for the cameras she knew were waiting outside. She wasn't crying for the boy she left behind. She was crying for the $32 million that boy had created with nothing but a broken keyboard and a mind the world refused to understand. My name is Clara, and the boy sitting next to me, staring intensely at a small, spinning blue widget in his hands, is my younger brother, Leo. Leo is 22 now, but to me, he will always be the sweet, silent 6-year-old who used to line up his toy cars by color for hours, rocking back and forth in a world only he could see. Leo is autistic. In a society that demands everyone fit into neat, predictable boxes, Leo was a beautiful, complex puzzle. And the woman weeping across the aisle? That is Eleanor, our biological mother. The woman who looked at her own flesh and blood, decided he was a broken investment, and walked out of our lives 16 years ago without so much as a backward glance. Growing up, our world was small, fragile, and desperately poor. When Eleanor packed her bags and vanished into the night, she didn't just leave Leo, she left me, a 12-year-old girl, to figure out how to be a mother, a protector, and a provider. Our father had passed away 2 years prior, a quiet, hard-working man whose lingering medical debts ate away what little savings we had. When he died, something inside Eleanor shifted. The warmth drained from her eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating resentment. She looked at our modest, 2-bedroom home in the faded suburbs not as a sanctuary, but as a prison. And she looked at Leo's sensory meltdowns not with compassion, but with pure disgust. "He's draining me, Clara," she would hiss late at night, her voice sharp enough to cut glass as she packed away the cheap groceries we could barely afford. "Look at him. He doesn't even know who I am. He will never go to college. He will never buy me a house. He is a bottomless pit of needs, and I am wasting my youth on a child who can't even look me in the eye." I remember wrapping my small arms around my knees, sitting on the cold kitchen linoleum, begging her to speak softer. I was terrified Leo would hear her, terrified that despite his silence, he would understand the venom in her words. But Leo lived in his own universe, a universe built of numbers, patterns, and lines of code that he would later discover. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, Leo was staring at the flickering static of our old television, mesmerized by the rhythm of the electronic pulses. Then came the night the world completely fractured. It was a freezing Tuesday in November. Leo was 6, and he was having a severe sensory overload. The neighbor's dog wouldn't stop barking, a relentless, piercing sound that felt like physical pain to his sensitive ears. He was screaming, rocking violently on the living room rug, his tiny hands over his ears. I was trying everything I knew, holding his favorite heavy blanket, whispering his favorite sequence of prime numbers, trying to anchor him to me. Eleanor walked into the room, dressed in her best coat, her luggage already sitting by the front door. She didn't look angry. She looked completely empty. A chilling, detached smile played on her lips. "I'm done," she said quietly, her voice cutting through Leo's frantic cries. "Mom, please help me hold him," I sobbed, my arms aching, my face wet with tears. "He just needs to calm down. Please don't leave." "I am leaving, Clara," she replied, adjusting her scarf in the hallway mirror. "And I am not coming back. I deserve a life. I deserve luxury, success, and people who can give me something in return. I am transferring the deed of this useless house to your name when you turn 18, but until then, use the meager survivor benefits from your father. Figure it out, or hand him over to the state. It's what I should have done the day he was born." With that, the heavy oak door clicked shut. The sound echoed through the empty hallway, a final, brutal punctuation mark to the first chapter of our lives. I remember holding Leo as his screams slowly subsided into soft, exhausted whimpers. The house was freezing, the silence suffocating. I was 12 years old, holding a child the world had deemed a burden, realizing that from that moment on, we only had each other. The years that followed were not a movie. They were a relentless, grinding battle for survival. When you are a teenager raising a child with profound special needs, the world does not pause to offer you grace. It watches you struggle with a cold, passive curiosity. I took online classes late at night, while working two dead-end jobs during the day, stacking grocery shelves at dawn, cleaning office buildings at night. My youth wasn't spent at prom or hanging out with friends. It was measured in pennies scraped together for Leo's speech therapy, in the constant anxiety of a looming utility bill, and in the fierce, protective wall I built around my brother. But as the years rolled on, a miracle began to unfold in our cramped, leaky living room. Leo couldn't navigate a social conversation, and eye contact remained a rare, precious gift. But give him an old, discarded laptop I found in a thrift store dumpster, and his entire being transformed. He was 14 when he taught himself basic Python. By 16, he was writing complex algorithms. While the rest of the world saw a boy who couldn't hold a job or speak to a cashier, I saw a master architect building digital empires in the dark. He didn't see lines of code the way we do. He saw them as living, breathing structures. He would sit for 18 hours straight, his fingers flying across the keys in a blur of beautiful, frantic energy, a soft hum vibrating in his throat. "Look, Clara," he whispered one night. It was the first time he had spoken an unprompted sentence in months. He pointed to the glowing screen. I looked closer. He had designed an entire interface, a beautiful, nonverbal communication application specifically tailored for children who experienced the world exactly like he did. It didn't use complicated text or jarring, bright colors. It used soothing, predictive geometric patterns and soft acoustic frequencies to translate a child's internal sensory chaos into clear, actionable requests for parents and caregivers. He called it the Guardian's voice. "It helps the noise go away," Leo said softly, his eyes fixed on the screen, a rare, brilliant smile illuminating his face. I burst into tears right there, pulling his rigid shoulders into a hug. He didn't pull away this time. He let me hold him, because he knew that this app wasn't just a project. It was his love letter to the world that had rejected him, and his thank you note to the sister who had stayed. We launched the Guardian's Voice on a free open-source platform, hoping it might help a few families in our local support group. But genius cannot be hidden in the shadows forever. Within 3 months, a major tech advocacy foundation discovered it. Within 6 months, pediatric clinics across the country were downloading it by the tens of thousands. Families everywhere were calling it a revolutionary breakthrough in developmental therapy. And then, the venture capitalists arrived. A prominent tech syndicate recognized the sheer, unadulterated brilliance of Leo's back-end algorithm, an AI architecture that could revolutionize data sorting for sensitive sensory inputs. They offered a buyout and a development partnership. I remember sitting in a massive, glass-walled boardroom downtown, a place where people like me usually only entered with a mop and a bucket. A man in a tailored suit handed a document across the table. An initial valuation of $32 million, the attorney said, his voice dripping with professional reverence. With a 5% rolling royalty for the creator, Mr. Leo. I looked at Leo, who was completely unbothered by the numbers, calmly tracing the grain of the expensive mahogany table with his index finger. My hands shook so violently I could barely sign the Guardian consent forms. We went home that night, not to a mansion, but to our small, familiar kitchen. We ordered Leo's favorite meal, plain white rice and grilled chicken from the local diner, and sat in the quiet comfort of our survival. We were safe. For the first time in 16 years, the specter of starvation, eviction, and ruin evaporated. But the universe has a twisted sense of timing. The news of the $32 million app created by Nonverbal Prodigy went viral. It was featured on national news, shared across millions of social media feeds, a heartwarming story of triumph over adversity. 2 days after the news broke, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting a delivery or a stray reporter. Instead, standing on our cracked concrete porch was a woman dripping in gold jewelry, wearing a pristine white trench coat, and holding a designer handbag that cost more than my annual grocery budget used to be. The face was older, tightened by expensive cosmetic procedures, but the cold, calculating eyes were unmistakable. "Eleanor." "Clara, my darling girl," she gasped, stepping forward with her arms wide open, her face twisted into an expression of profound, theatrical maternal longing. Oh, thank God. I've searched for you two for so long. My beautiful children. I froze, my blood turning to absolute ice in my veins. The woman who had left us to starve, the woman who called my brother a bottomless pit, was standing on my porch with tears in her eyes. But as I looked past her shoulder, I noticed a sleek, black luxury sedan idling at the curb. Inside sat a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, actively looking through a thick legal manila folder. She hadn't come back for her children. She had smelled the money. "Get out," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of ancient rage and current disgust. "Clara, please, you don't understand," Eleanor pleaded, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched away as if her fingers were coated in venom. I was young. I was broken. I had postpartum depression. The pressure of raising a child like Leo, it destroyed my mind. I had to leave to save myself so I could eventually come back for you. And look at him now. My beautiful, genius son. I always knew he had a special gift. I prayed for him every single day. You didn't pray for him, Eleanor. You abandoned him," I said, my voice rising, steadying, hardening into steel. "You told me to give him to the state. You left a 12-year-old and a 6-year-old in a freezing house with nothing but stale bread and father's medical debts. You don't get to walk back in because his mind is now worth millions." The sweet, maternal facade dropped instantly, fast enough to give you whiplash. The corners of her mouth curled down into that old, familiar, razor-sharp sneer. "We'll see about that," she snapped, stepping back toward her idling car. "I am his mother, Clara. His biological, legal mother. He was a minor under my care when his developmental issues began. Half of whatever he creates belongs to the woman who carried him for 9 months and gave him the genetics that made him a genius. My lawyers will be in touch." True to her threat, the lawsuit arrived 48 hours later. Eleanor was suing for full retroactive maternal custody, alleging that I had intentionally alienated Leo from her, brainwashed him against his mother, and illegally managed his intellectual property without maternal consent. She was demanding a full freeze on the $32 million trust fund and a 50% lifetime stake in all future developments of the Guardian's voice. Which brings us back to that polished, sterile courtroom. Her high-priced attorney stood up, projecting a voice full of righteous indignation. He painted a picture of a tragic, grieving mother who had been pushed out of her home by economic hardship and family alienation, a woman who had spent 16 years searching for her lost children, only to find her daughter hiding her son away to exploit his tech talents for personal gain. "Your Honor," the lawyer boomed, holding up pictures of Eleanor's current, luxurious lifestyle. "My client is a woman of means, fully capable of providing Mr. Leo with the high-end medical care, private security, and luxury estate he deserves. Her daughter has kept him in a small, dilapidated suburban home, forcing him to work hours on end coding applications. This isn't a success story, it's sibling exploitation." I sat there, my chest tightening, the familiar panic of my childhood threatening to suffocate me. I looked at our legal counsel, a young, quiet public interest attorney named David, whom I had chosen because he specialized in disability rights, not corporate asset protection. David didn't have a $1,000 suit, but he had a look of calm, unyielding certainty in his eyes. "Your Honor, if I may," David said, standing up quietly. He didn't bring a stack of financial arguments. Instead, he brought an old, dusty cardboard box, the box of items Eleanor had left behind in her haste to abandon us 16 years ago. The plaintiff claims she has spent 16 years searching for her children. She claims she was alienated, David stated, his voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "But we have subpoenaed the tax records, utility registration history, and property deeds of the plaintiff over the last decade and a half. Eleanor never left this state. She lived exactly 45 minutes away in a luxury high-rise condominium, purchased with the inheritance of her second husband." The judge frowned, looking over the documents David handed to the bench. But more importantly, David continued, turning directly to Eleanor, whose dry wiping of her eyes had suddenly stopped. "We have the original diary and audio recordings of the young Clara from the year 2014. On the night of November 14th, after her mother walked out, 12-year-old Clara used her father's old cassette recorder to document the event, terrified that social services would take her brother away if she didn't record the truth. David pressed play on a small recorder on his table. A child's voice filled the courtroom, cracked, terrified, trembling, accompanied by the distant, heartbreaking screams of a small boy in sensory distress. "Mom left tonight," my 12-year-old voice sobbed through the speaker. "She packed her big brown bags. She told me Leo is a bottomless pit of needs. She said he would never buy her a house or give her luxury, so she was leaving him to the state. I'm scared, Daddy. It's so cold in the house, but I promise I will never leave him. I will keep him safe from her." The silence that followed that recording was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. The judge looked at the papers, looked at Eleanor, who had turned a sickly, pale white, and then looked down at Leo, who was still calmly spinning his blue widget, entirely detached from the drama, but completely safe in his sister's shadow. The judge closed the file with a definitive, booming thud. "This court finds the plaintiff's petition not only entirely without legal merit, but morally reprehensible," the judge said, her voice dripping with absolute scorn. To abandon a vulnerable child because of his disability, to leave a 12-year-old child to act as a parent, and then to return 16 years later solely because that child's beautiful mind achieved financial success. This is a grotesque abuse of the legal system. The judge looked directly at me, her eyes softening into deep respect. "Clara, your guardianship over Leo is confirmed, permanent, and unassailable. The trust fund remains entirely under Leo's name, managed by your sole oversight. Furthermore, this court is referring the plaintiff's admitted historical child abandonment to the district attorney's office for immediate review of criminal negligence and statute exceptions." Eleanor let out a sharp, genuine gasp of horror this time, not for the cameras, but for herself. Her high-priced lawyers immediately began packing up their briefcases, actively distancing themselves from a woman who was now facing public ruin and legal jeopardy. She tried to catch my eye as they escorted her out of the room, her lips moving in a desperate, silent plea for mercy. But my eyes were already back on Leo. I reached over and gently placed my hand near his. He stopped spinning his widget, looked up at me, and for 3 long, beautiful seconds, he locked his brilliant blue eyes directly into mine. He didn't need to speak. In those 3 seconds, I saw the little boy from the cold kitchen floor, the teenager with the dumpster laptop, and the young man who had changed the world. We had won. Not just the money, and not just the lawsuit. We had won our peace. As we walked out of the courthouse, past the flashing lights of the reporters that Eleanor had called for herself, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt an incredible, weightless freedom. Eleanor had chased luxury her entire life, abandoning the only true wealth she ever possessed, the unconditional bond of family. She was left with nothing but an empty coat, a tarnished reputation, and the cold comfort of her greed. Leo and I went home. We didn't change our lives. We just made sure our small house was warm, the music was soft, and the world outside could never hurt us again. True justice isn't about destroying those who hurt you. It is about building a life so beautiful, so secure, and so full of love that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a faint, distant whisper in a world that is finally, beautifully quiet.